Book 4 is a book that's kind of action-packed. It's not descriptive like Book 1 or Book 6. This one's going to be a naval battle that takes place, and part of it takes place on land as well, but it's about Caesar trying to land on the British coast. So let's see what's going on here. But the barbarians, with the plan of the Romans having been known, and with the cavalry having been sent forth, and the chariots that you can see here, the British soldiers fought from this two-wheeled chariot, and I guess they didn't really used to use that anymore on the continent, so it's kind of an older form. With which kind, or the main verb, so the main verb is they were accustomed. So they were very much accustomed in battles to use this kind of fighting, or this kind of chariot. So remember, utor takes the ablative, that's why that's the object there. With the remaining troops having followed ours, like our troops, they were preventing from the ships to be disembarked. So they were preventing us to disembark from the ships, because that's a deponent verb. So they were preventing to come forth from the ships. There was, on account of these things, the greatest difficulty, because the ships, on account of the magnitude, or like the depth, or actually no, account of their magnitude, so it's account of the ship's magnitude, except in the deep, were not able to be established. Like they weren't able to pull them up to the shore because of how large they were. However, so this militibus will go with the oppresses here, and the main verbs are that they had to jump out, and they had to stop in the waves, and they had to fight with the enemy. But how are these soldiers described? So this is a dative agent with the passive periphrastic. But to the soldiers, however, or by the soldiers, however, with the places unknown, and with hands impeded, and with a great and grave, or like heavy burden of weapons, to them oppressed, so to the soldiers having been oppressed by all of these things. At the same time, it was necessary they had to jump down from the ships, and into the waves they had to stand, or in the waves they had to stand, and with the enemy they had to fight, because they are kind of made as a cum circumstantial. So while they, either from dry land or a little ways into the water, having progressed with all their members unimpeded, and with the places known, or most known, because they know this area, fiercely they were tossing weapons, and they were inciting their well-trained horses. Because of which matters, our men, terrified and altogether unexperienced of this kind of fighting, so inexperienced in this kind of fighting, but of this sort of fight, not with the same fierceness and not with the same zeal as on foot, they're accustomed. So basically, they were not using, or they were not using the same alacrity and zeal with which in foot battles they're accustomed to use in pedestribus consuerant. So as in foot battles they were accustomed to use. So they were not using the same alacrity and the same zeal which in foot battles they were accustomed to use, or had been accustomed to use. Which thing when Caesar had noticed the long ships, of which both the species was to the barbarians more unaccustomed, so they weren't familiar with this kind of things, and the movement was more convenient or more useful for this particular use, he ordered a little ways to be removed and from the burden-bearing ships, so from the freight ships, and to be incited with oars, and to the open side of the enemy to be placed, so to be established next to them, and from there, with slings and with arrows and with missile hurling machines the enemy to be repelled, and he ordered them to be removed, which matter was for our men a great use or a great help or aid or assistance. For the shape of the ships and by the shape of the ships and by the movement of the oars, and because of the unaccustomed kind of missiles, the barbarians thoroughly moved, stopped. So they stood in their place, and just a little ways over, they took back their foot, so they retreated just a little bit. And with our soldiers hesitating greatly on account of the depth of the sea, he who was carrying the eagle, the standard of the 10th Legion, having beseeched the gods that matter might come about fortunately for the Legion, so that might come about luckily for the Legion, he said the following. We're going to see that on the next page. And this part's really cool. So the standard bearer said, "Jump down," he says. Co-militones is like comrades, but like soldier comrades are people who are fighting together. So co-military ones, jump down, he says, "unless you wish the eagle to be given forth or to be lost, hand betrayed to the enemy. I certainly will put first, or will show my duty to the Republic and to the Emperor." This thing with a large voice he had said, or when he had said this thing with a large voice, himself from the ship he tossed down, and into the enemies he began to carry the eagle. Then our men, having been exhorted amongst themselves, so they all get excited by this, lest such a shame or dishonor they might admit, lest they admit such a shame or dishonor altogether, universally. So altogether they jumped down from the ship. These ones, the same way from the neighboring ships, the first people in the ship, or the ones at the front of the ship, when they had seen, having followed, they were approaching to the enemy. So the other guys see this in the neighboring ships, and they also jump out. It is fought by each side ferociously. Ours, however, because neither their orders or their ranks, like their battle lines, to guard or preserve, nor firmly to stand, nor the signs to follow were able. So they weren't able to do any of these things once they were in the water. And one from another ship, with whatever sign he had met, himself he joined. So it was so chaotic that they would just join whatever sign was nearby, not necessarily their own, and they weren't able to preserve their ranks. Greatly they were being disturbed. The enemy, indeed, with all the shallows having been known, so they know where to stand in the water, when from the shore other ones, or some singularly from the ships jumping out they had seen, like maybe individually jumping out, with their horses having been excited, the burdened down ones they were attacking. Many were surrounding few. Others from the open side into all were tossing weapons. Which thing when Caesar had noticed, the boats of the long ships and the spying ships he ordered to be filled with, so those are the small ones, with soldiers, and whoever laboring or whom laboring he had seen, to these he was sending help. Ours at the same time on dry land stood, and with all having followed into the enemy an attack they had made, and them into flight they had given, so the enemy started retreating. Neither longer would they have been able to follow, because the horsemen, the course, and the island to capture were not able. This one thing alone was absent toward the pristine fortune for Caesar. So for Caesar, this thing alone, that he wasn't able to conquer everyone and totally whip them, was absent, but everything else was glorious.